want to tell you a story that's part of a greater story. When I was 23 years old, I was dating this girl, and her family had an old historic home, and her friends had some old historic homes, and my parents had an old historic home. And I always thought it would be cool to renovate an old historic home. So I was 23 years old. I bought this home that was, the whole home was about 9,000 square feet, about 6,000 square foot of living space. The upstairs attic was about 1,500 square feet, and the downstairs was about 1,500 square feet. Now, what was weird is I only bought half the house. It was built as a duplex in the 1800s, and then later, the person that built it sold off both halves of the house. So it was really kind of a dumb decision to buy half a house, because no matter what, I was going to live next to someone in the other half that I didn't know and didn't know anything about it. Well, I did it. And what I did was, I thought, I was young and single and a bachelor, and I thought I would have other friends, guy friends, live with me to help pay the mortgage. So some friends would move in from time to time. And then I realized, as I was praying about living there, that this would be a good place for young men that are in ministry, that maybe are single and need a place to live, or missionaries that just need a short-term place. The house was plenty big. We could put beds in different rooms and kind of spread out. And so I would just charge rent month to month or whatever. And if they wanted to live there a month, they could live there a month. If they wanted to live there a year, they could live there years. Well, I had about 21 total roommates in a period of, I don't know, it was 5 years or whatever it was. It was amazing, the ministry that happened there. Well, during that time, I was traveling as a motivational speaker. I had a van and lived down by the river, which is kind of funny. I didn't live in a van down by the river. But anyway, I was traveling all over the Midwest doing leadership training and volleyball. I had a volleyball camp that I traveled around with the NCAA Woman of the Year, and we did these camps and that kind of stuff. Well, a lot of the money that I made, one was from the leadership training, but the other was from the rental. Well, as time passed, I was able actually to buy the other half of the house. Well, what I did is I converted that to 2 apartments, and I rented those apartments out, and they were really providing most of my income, or not most, but a significant chunk of my income. Well, at one point I was praying, and God said, I want you, this was after about a year or two that I had that apartment rented out, or those apartments. God said, I want you to use the other half for a ministry. And I said, what do you mean the other half for a ministry? He said, I want you to create kind of a fellowship place for young adults, people in their 20s, because we had this big circle of friends that were hanging out all the time. And I'm like, God, at that time, what was interesting, I had a roof that was bad. It was going to cost me about $8,500 for the roof. I'd started a patio project, and I ran out of this really unique brick it's this old historic, real thick brick that you could only find in historic areas, and I couldn't find any. I ran out. I didn't estimate it correctly, and I needed another 1,000, 2,000 bricks. I can't remember the total number of bricks. So I had a patio project going. I had a roof leak. I had a plumbing leak. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong with this house. And now, after needing an $8,000 roof and these bricks and all this stuff, and I couldn't find the bricks anywhere. God called me to take the apartment or the apartments and kick the people out and make a fellowship hall. And I'm like, that's not happening, God. And I, over and over and over, I would be in prayer, and God would say, I want you to do this. I want you to take a step of faith. And I'm like, I am not going to do this. So I fought with the Lord for about 3, 4, 5 months. I can't remember how long. And I finally said, okay, God, I really don't want to do this, but I'll do it. So I went to the tenants that were in there, and there was 2 girls on that side. Again, there was a wall between us, so we didn't all live together. And the girl said, hey, Mike, I just want to let you know we felt called to move out. And we're like, oh, so you're moving out? And they're like, yeah, we're just going to do something else. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting, because I came over to talk to you because I'm going to use the place for a ministry. And so anyway, the house still needed work. I needed all new carpet. The roof was bad. The pavers, I had started a back patio project, and I needed sod back there. It was kind of a disaster. It was just bad timing. I'm like, okay, God, why would you call me when I have all these projects going on? Well, one night, I was praying about the roof. I was like, God, you have to help me with this. It's an $8,000 roof. I don't have any money. If you're going to call me to do this. And I just cried out to the Lord. I said, God, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. I can't afford it. And my leadership training, I wasn't doing as much because I was working on this ministry. And that night I prayed for the roof. A horrible storm hit the house and ripped a section of the roof off. And I'm like, and the insurance covered it. So I got a whole new roof. And I'm like, okay, God, that was pretty cool. That was not exactly how I expected you to answer that prayer. Well, I had started this patio project, and this was cool. I met with the church that we were going to, the kind of executive pastor guy, and I sat down with him and I said, hey, I feel called to do this, and I know you have a college ministry. I want to let you know that you can use it. It's yours. You know, you can use the house however you want. And I said, and he said, well, is there anything you need? I said, well, the problem is the flooring's really bad in there. I need to get some carpet. I'm trying to figure out if I can get a discount on some carpet anywhere. I didn't know what to do. He goes, well, that's interesting. I said, what? He said, I think we have some carpet at the church that's in a roll that we haven't used for like 5 years. Well, come to find out, it was exactly, almost to the square inch, what we needed to complete the entire, basically, apartment. I'm like, holy cow. So anyway, we started having people over, and the place got packed. Well, what was happening is, where I was doing my pavers, there was sand there because I hadn't I hadn't bought all the pavers yet. And I was like, okay, God, what am I going to do to find these pavers? Because they couldn't, I couldn't find any anywhere in my city. I called all over the place. Nobody had these pavers, and I needed, like I said, 1,000 or more pavers. Well, I got on my knees one night. I said, God, what am I supposed to do? Now, at the same time this was happening, my neighbor's garage just happened to have the exact same type of bricks that I was using for my pavers, and the garage had started bowing on the outside pretty bad. Just a 100-something-year-old garage just was dilapidated, and it started bowing. And so I got on my knees one night, and I was like, and they had yellow tape around the garage. And I said, God, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need these pavers. Now, keep in mind, I was going to have to travel like 3-4 hours to find these pavers in like Cincinnati or Indianapolis or St. Louis, because they were all old historic home pavers and hard to find. And so I was praying. I said, God, I don't know what to do. I said, I'm trying to honor you. I got too many people coming. They're bringing sand in the house. I don't know what I'm going to do about these pavers. The next day I walk out. I got a phone call, and the neighbor said, hey, come outside. And went outside, and that garage that had the yellow tape around it had collapsed, and the pavers were literally attached to my property. He said, if you want all these bricks, they're yours. We got to haul them off. I had to bust some of the mortar off of some of them, but for the most part, I was able to get about 2,000 bricks, and I made my patio project even bigger. Now, what are the chances? I mean, okay, that's maybe a coincidence. Well, the other thing that was happening is I had leveled out the yard and was getting ready to put some grass seed and straw down, but it was going to take too long to grow the grass, and people were walking on and off the grass from the ministry. And I remember sitting at lunch one time with this friend of mine named Jim, and I said, he said, I heard what's happening in your ministry. It's just amazing. And there's a million other stories of God providing coffee supplies and paint and all these things that were unbelievable. Well, I was out to lunch with this guy, and he said, what do you guys need now? I said, I need sod bad. And he goes, God's not going to provide you with sod. I said, well, he's provided so far. Well, that day I prayed about it, and I went home, and my brother-in-law calls my wife and says, does Michael need any sod by any chance? He had a construction business and was putting sod down on the property, and the guy didn't lay it in time, or didn't excavate it in time. So the sod was going to dry up unless he gave it away. So I went and picked, it was exactly the amount of sod I needed to finish the project. To the square foot probably. Unbelievable. So, and that was after I had just told this guy I needed sod. I mean, it was just totally God providing, right? Well, we outgrew our space. We had 100 people coming, and we didn't really have good parking. And well, as I was renovating this place and doing all this stuff and doing all this ministry, I would jog up and down Main Street in my hometown. And at least 4 or 5 times, probably maybe even 10 times, I would stop. I'd be walking down Main Street or jogging. It was my jog time. And I'd see somebody I know, and we'd start talking, and I'd look up, and I'm like, why do I always get stopped in front of the same building all the time? Oh, man, this happened over and over and over and over again. I'm like, what is the deal? Or one day I remember walking by, and there was like a dollar sitting on the ground, and I'm like, what is that? And why is it sitting here? And I'm looking around, nobody's there, and I pick it up, and there's the building, same building, over and over again. And this happened for 4 months. I kept stopping. Someone would stop me or interrupt me or initiate a conversation in front of this building. And I was like, what? And I'd look in the building, and it was an abandoned, I don't know if it used to be a retail store of some kind. Well, I just would move on. I'd pray about it and move on. Well, one day I was still doing the leadership training, and a guy had made my brochures for me. I stopped at his office to get more brochures, and when I came in, he said, "Michael, I feel like we're supposed to talk about something." And he was an older gentleman, and I said, "Okay." And so, what do you want to talk about? He said, "Just come up to my office. Let's chat." So I went up to his office and I said, "What do you want to talk about?" He said, "Well, I see your ministry's growing real well." And I said, "Yeah, it's really amazing what God's doing." I said, "I just blown away." And he said, "What do you?" And I told him, I said, "We're out of room though." I said, the apartment's like 1,500 square foot or so, but we really need a more public place because we don't have parking and all that kind of stuff." He said, "What are you doing tomorrow morning?" At, I don't know, it's 10 o'clock or whatever. And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Why don't you meet me at 221 Main Street?" And I'm like, well, I didn't even know what 221 Main Street was. I said, "Okay." So I walked down the street and I'm like, wait a minute. And I looked, and it was the building that I had stopped in front of at least 5 to 10 times and prayed over. And I said, "You own this building?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "No way." I said, "I've prayed over this building like 5 or 10 times. And he goes, "No way." I said, "Yeah." And he opens it up, and it's kind of a disaster. It's just it probably hadn't been used since like the 70s. I mean, it was a ratty, old carpet, old walls, drop ceilings, nasty facility. And he hands me the key. He said, "Michael, here's the key." And I said, "What do you mean, here's the key?" He said, "I want you to use it. You can have it. Not for my own to keep it, but to use it for the ministry." And I said, "Mike," I said, "First of all, thank you. But two, I can't renovate this. I can't afford what I have." And I said, "There's no way that I can, one, pay you rent, and number two, renovate it." And he said, "No, I'm not asking for rent." And he said, "Don't worry about renovating it. God will provide. Just watch." I'm like, okay. So I got in there and I started kind of ripping up the carpet, which was kind of dumb because I couldn't replace it. But the carpet was so old it wasn't going to be used anyway. So I tear out the carpet, start taking out some of the paneling, start taking out the drop ceilings. And I kid you not, for the next 30 days, and I need to write a book on it because I need to sit down and document every time God showed up. I literally would need nails or screws or whatever the case may be. And someone would literally walk by and go, "What's going on here?" And I'd say, "I'm getting ready to start a ministry here. We're going to be like a coffee shop type atmosphere." And they said, "Well, I got a bunch of supplies on my truck that I'm not using. I was going to dump them. You want these?" And it would be screws or nails or you name it, paint, or it didn't matter. It was always, what was crazy was always exactly, I would run out of nail or screws and someone would come by with a box of screws. I would run out of wood and someone would come by with wood. I would run out of paint and someone would come by with paint. I mean, we had a ceiling that needed to be painted. And this guy walks in and he said, "What are you guys doing in here?" And I said, "Well, we're almost ready to paint." I said, I don't have the paint. And someone ended up giving us the paint. And he said, "It's kind of interesting because I just finished being off for a few weeks because of a medical injury and I'm ready to get back to work, but I haven't told the employer yet." He said, "I can take a couple days before I get back and paint your ceilings for you. No charge." You got to be kidding me. So we literally in 1 month's time did in today's dollars, about an $80,000 renovation, maybe a $50,000 for sure, but closer to $80,000 renovation in 30 days, and didn't ask for a penny and didn't spend a dime. Everything just showed up. So I went from my house downtown where God provided over and over and over and over again, and I missed probably 20 stories that I didn't tell you, to downtown. And we saw everything down there. When we opened it up, well, the crazy thing is when we opened that street, Main Street, it was not a drivable street. You had to walk through it. They made a decision years ago, the 90s or 80s or whatever it was, to close off the street for road traffic, and you could only do foot traffic. Well, it killed all the businesses. The day we opened the doors, the city had decided to open the street, which was another amazing. And then that same day, the news stations came down and interviewed us, and the newspaper did a huge article on us. We didn't even have to pay for advertising. We had this huge full-page ad, front page of the newspaper, advertising the streets were open and come down to this coffee shop. Was amazing. And from that point on, I could tell you story upon story upon story of how people got healed, people got casted out, demons casted out, people that gave their life to the Lord, it's just amazing the stories of what happened in that facility downtown. And I remember, I guess what I remember most about it is fighting with the Lord the whole way. It's just saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't have the money for this or whatever. And I would cry like a baby and God would show up. And then I'd go, God, but what about this? And God would show up. And matter of fact, I was doing the ministry for the most part full time, and it wasn't really bringing in any revenue. And I had bills to pay. And God would still someone would say, hey, Michael, I just felt like sending you $1,000 or $500 or whatever. And this went on for at least 2 years. We finally turned over the ministry to someone else, and they had similar experiences. But my challenge is, if God's calling you to do something, and it's bigger than you, and you think, I can't do this, you're right. Look at the stories of Moses and Elijah and Joshua and, fighting the battle of Jericho. What did he do? God called him to do something stupid, walk around the city for 7 days. None of it usually doesn't make sense. It's usually God calling you beyond your comfort zone and beyond your abilities. God doesn't typically call you within your abilities. He calls you outside of your abilities. So, because he wants to show up and his name wants to be praised. So, anyway, thanks for listening to this story. God bless.